Chapter 14, The Club of Rome. Why am I interested in promoting the posture of skepticism and the pursuit of truth? Why am I advocating the concepts of curiosity and neutrality over the habits of trust and acceptance? Let's look at another example. In the early 1970s, a Rockefeller-funded group, the Club of Rome, was tasked with identifying plausible threats that operate above the level of the nation-state, threats which arguably require global cooperation in order to head them off. The reason to identify such threats is not entirely clear to me, but I suspect it might have been in order to be able to justify the need for certain high-level institutions that would be given power and authority, ostensibly to fight against those threats. What are those threats that the Club of Rome identified? One was pandemics of infectious disease. Another was the idea of catastrophic climate change. Sound familiar? Let me reiterate. The notion of preparing ourselves to contend with pandemics of infectious disease and catastrophic climate change does not seem to have been brought to the attention of the public spontaneously and independently by researchers, scientists, academics, physicians. These ideas seem to have been purposefully embedded in the public consciousness by a mission-driven think tank. I suspect the intention of many of the individuals participating in the Club of Rome's meetings was good. People want a clean world, not a polluted one. We want health, not sickness. The Club of Rome participants might have been thinking along the lines of this quotation, quote, "The significant problems we face cannot be solved at the same level of thinking we were at when we created them," unquote. That sentence is attributed to Albert Einstein, but I have not found a reference for it. While it might not be verbatim from Einstein, the sentence encapsulates his approach to scientific inquiry and human understanding, suggesting that intellectual or developmental growth is necessary to tackle increasingly complex problems. Maybe the Club of Rome and the Rockefeller Foundation and globalist institutions do not have a desire to supplant national sovereignty with central control. You and I can even have different perspectives about this. From where I sit, however, my opinion is that the urgent warnings pertaining to climate science, as well as pandemics of infectious disease, that apparently were first suggested as problematic by the Club of Rome, a Rockefeller-funded think tank, and not by subject area specialists, may, even if they were well-intentioned, amount to little more than a psychological operation on the population. Are temperatures changing on Earth? Indeed, they always have, way before human industry or even humans entered the equation. A combination of factors affects this. In the Earth's long history, you will find ice ages and also times when the poles were liquid and had no ice. Energy expert Alex Epstein states that the Earth has warmed approximately 1 degree Celsius over the past 170 years, and that humans contribute to this warming through CO2 emissions. He suggests, however, that while many scientists agree humans have some impact on warming, most do not quantify it as the dominant factor, and this agreement does not inherently support drastic policy responses like phasing out fossil fuels. Epstein has called this framing a deliberate misrepresentation meant to intimidate the public into accepting extreme measures. Epstein states that predictions about severe weather or sea level rise are exaggerated, and he asserts that human adaptability can mitigate such threats. He does not deny that fossil fuels have side effects, including climate impacts, but insists that any evaluation must weigh these against their indispensable role in powering modern civilization, especially for developing nations. Study after study, according to Epstein, has found that deaths from cold outnumber deaths from heat by 5 to 15 times. On every continent, cold is more dangerous than heat. Even in many countries we think of as especially hot, such as India, cold-related deaths significantly exceeded heat-related deaths. Epstein frames climate change as a manageable issue, citing the life-saving and prosperity-enhancing benefits of fossil fuels, advocating for their continued use rather than a rapid transition to alternatives like solar and wind, which he considers less reliable and less cost-effective. His perspective is rooted in a, quote, human flourishing, unquote, framework, prioritizing energy access and economic progress over what he calls an, quote, anti-human, unquote, push to eliminate fossil fuels based on speculative climate fears. What about infectious diseases? Humanity will be dealing with these well into the future, and yet the survival of and recovery from infectious diseases has improved tremendously, apparently mainly due to engineering. Pay attention to this sentence from the medical journal Pediatrics. Quote, "In conclusion, the largest historical decrease in morbidity and mortality caused by infectious disease was experienced not with the modern antibiotic and vaccine era, but after the introduction of clean water and effective sewer systems." Unquote. Plenty of evidence tells us that the so-called pandemics of modernity have to do with the unfortunate consequences of laboratory experimentation, biological weapons research, and various types of unnecessary human intervention, not nature or the natural development of life forms. Baha'is believe in the oneness of humanity, that humankind is like a global village. Baha'is believe in international cooperation. Baha'is are called to obey government and have respect for authority. We believe civilizational maturity is leading humanity toward a federated international system of global governance. Yet, are Baha'is obligated to automatically endorse the vision for humanity as set forth by organizations such as the Club of Rome, the World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, and so on? When I look closely at Baha'i writings that sketch the outlines of humanity's future possibilities, this vision looks very different to me than the one currently being proposed by the aforementioned secular globalist institutions and by the small group of wealthy and elite people that fund some of these institutions and help steer their course. More on this in the next chapter.